That's just a weed. We don't sell weeds here. But you'll see that in this sermon. So God, through Isaiah this morning, tells us that all of creation, not just the world, but better put, the entire cosmos, lives in the liminal in-between time. I am the first and I am the last. Beside me, there is no God. I am the first and I am the last. And in between is the liminal time. And we know that these liminal between times in spirituality of the Celtic people are called thin places. It's been the theme that Reed left with us. And so we're continuing on. God tells us in no uncertain terms who God is this morning. Go ahead, just for a minute, just go back and read that passage from Isaiah, which was read so brilliantly. Just read it again for a second, seriously. And in our response from the psalm, we say the very first line to this reading, is our response to the reading from Isaiah. Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. Knit my heart to you that I may fear your name. Now, this kind of fear isn't about being afraid of God. It's more about being in awe of God. And after what we just heard from Isaiah, awe seems pretty appropriate, wouldn't you say? Asking God to teach us God's way is one of those fasten your seatbelts moments. And yet that's exactly what we ask of God every single Sunday here. Now, if you wrap that request to have God teach us God's way in awe, appropriate to God, the awe that God deserves, and then just when it dawns on us that maybe we are in over our heads, the psalmist tells us, for great is your love toward me. You can change all the me's in that psalm to us's. For great is your love toward us. For me, I know God's unconditional love through Jesus. His life, his death, his resurrection. Again, this caused a thin place moment in my life. I lived for 9 short months in Hopewell Junction, New York, just above Westchester County. And I attended the Church of the Resurrection. That was where, as one spiritual director told me I should do, I walked all the way through Holy Week, one day at a time, every single day. I went to every service and every offering of anything that came from the church. And the rector there that year was somebody who believed that there was something every single day in Holy Week. And it didn't matter to me whether I knew what was going on or happening or I understood. This is before I was ordained, clearly, went to seminary. Although sometimes I think, I still don't know. But I did sign up to sit with Jesus for a couple of hours on Monday, Thursday night. They had a night watch. I don't know whether you do that here in Holy Week, but there was a night watch. And I thought, well, I can do that. I had no idea what you were supposed to do or what would happen, but I showed up in all my ignorance. There were a few other people there sitting quietly, and so I went in and did exactly what I saw everybody else do. I was sure I was the most ignorant person there. I wondered whether doing this really mattered to Jesus at all, quite frankly. And when my time was coming to a close, I stepped toward the garden, the little arrangement of the garden that they had set up around the reserved sacrament, representing Jesus, the garden at Gethsemane. And I knelt down just to say a quick prayer. And I looked at the reserved sacrament container sitting there. Thin place alert. It was like the most lovely feeling came streaming around me and wrapped itself around me. It took my breath away, and I was sort of sitting there in awe, not aware of anything else around me except for this feeling. And then I knew what I was feeling, and just like that, it was Jesus's love for me. But not just for me. This was bigger than just me. It was as powerful as it was lovely. And suddenly, my faith just kind of opened up in a brand new way. I thought for sure that this feeling was radiating out to everyone behind me, and perhaps even everyone outside of this wonderful, beautiful little A-frame church. But when I turned around, it was just me and the rector's teenage son. And he was reading a book and didn't want any part of me, no eye contact whatsoever. So I went out and sat in my car for a while. And I have to say, I felt a little bit like Mary, pondering what was happening in my heart and how that might impact my life. But I had no idea. I just knew that something had happened to me. This psalm this morning always reminds me of that thin place. Jesus knit his love into my heart that day. And nothing can really talk me out of that again, but it is more about faith than certainty. I can't explain what happened. I have no clue why it happened. But it was about faith, not about certainty. And the psalm goes on to say, I will thank you, O Lord my God, with all my heart and glorify your name forevermore. For great is your love toward me. You have delivered me from the nethermost pit. So from that time, let's see, that would have been 1993. So when the arrogant have risen up against me, that place in my heart actually helps me to stand there and be okay. I remember Jesus's love. And when I stumble or find fear turning me away from something that scares me, because I'm really not a very brave person, I spent a whole year doing one brave thing every day to try and get braver. It is verse 15 that holds me still. But you, O Lord, are gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, and full of kindness and truth. Those are words we can live by. Those are words Jesus lived by. When I sin, and I think that I know better than God, or remember some disparaging moment, because of that night, I get to ask God for help much faster. Certainty goes out the window, and I become like those little children, ready to make space for something new. And then verse 16, turn to me and have mercy upon me. Give your strength to your servant. Give your strength to your servant and save the child of your handmaid. That is a comforting line, I think. Now, verse 17. I don't really need verse 17 because that love is already knit into my heart. And if I actually believed in signs from God within me, I don't need to make anyone feel ashamed. So 17 in my faith just kind of gets knocked out of that psalm because I don't want to make anybody feel ashamed. I don't need to do that. And certainty is less reliable than faith. That's why signs just really, well, you can see things as signs, but you can't see them as certainties. You can see them as the power of your faith. And what an amazing faith hallmark, let's call it, instead of a sign. And that moment was for me. It's helped me in some of my hardest times. Our gospel this morning is ripe with wisdom for hard times. Now, side note here, the Gospel of Matthew, I think Matthew dwells too much on separating things from the good and the bad, and it makes me nervous. I'm a both and person, not an either or. And separating things happens too much in our lives right now. Times of conflict, times when we don't yet understand a way forward, times when our sadness overwhelms us, times when we're afraid, literally afraid of what's going to come next. And Jesus says in the gospel, let both of them grow together until the harvest. No separation. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. Now, I'm pretty sure that God created what I'll refer to as original seeds. So all those seeds came from God, some planted with best intentions and some planted with evil intentions. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. Some would grow and some would not. But all would have the same conditions, God's conditions. Let them grow together. In John's gospel, Jesus says, a grain of wheat must fall to the ground and die in order to bear fruit. So does that apply here too? When we isolate ourselves into us and them, growth gets stunted in all kinds of ways. What does our faith tell us is happening as we grow together, side by side? Do we find strength in our faith by coming together here every Sunday? I think yes. Or by helping out with one of the ministries started by the church. I was listening to some of the things said about the art camp that went on here, and that other people are noticing that art camp, hearing about it, and showing up to see what it is. We grow together. And sometimes it's transforming for some of us. It feeds our hearts and souls. And we can see how God is knitting us together, literally. Even though we may not agree on all the issues and decisions thundering around us in the world. fact is that God is always wrapping us with God's unconditional love. And it makes a huge difference. It truly matters. So I wonder every 3 years with this gospel, if the love, patience, and hope that grew alongside and wrapped around these seeds could have transformed some of those seeds from weeds to wheat, and maybe even some to Queen Anne's lace. And once again this morning, Jesus is telling us the key to the transformation process. Give yourself to listening first and plant a seed of love and generosity and compassion, slow to anger and full of kindness and truth. And all this takes place between the first and the last, in the in-between times of transitions and times of transformations are in God's hands first. So here's to growing the kingdom one seed at a time. We will hope for what we do not see, as St. Paul said. We will wait for it in patience, but that's not a passive wait. As we all know, God is depending on us, but we will be patient because, as always, it is God who is in charge. We just have to keep our eyes and our ears tuned on Jesus. Amen.